going on, everybody? You're listening to Trail Tales, the podcast where I, Kyle O'Grady, a thru-hiker and peak bagger, chat with other thru-hikers and peak baggers about their experiences on the trail. This week's guest goes by the name of Kristen Gardella. She's awesome. She hiked the Appalachian Trail in 1999. We talk all about what it was like back then and kind of compare and contrast what the trail is like today. She also has hiked a number of smaller trails, including the North-South Trail in Rhode Island. That's right, Rhode Island has a freaking hiking trail, people. And we also talk quite a bit about that, kind of just the general information. I ask her a bunch of basic questions and kind of learn about it because I don't live too far from Rhode Island, and I kind of want to go hike that trail someday. So I think it's really good stuff. Kristen, when you hear this, thank you so much for coming on. I really, really appreciate it. I want to keep the introduction short this week, so bear with me just for another minute here. I just got to say a couple things. First of all, if you like the show, if you like what you hear, and you haven't followed Trail Tales on Instagram, well then, what the hell are you doing? Go follow that shit. Smash that follow button, people. Oh god, I love that line. At Trail Tales Pod, that's the Instagram. That's also the Twitter, which I have not been using lately. I need to get back on the Twitter grind. So go follow me there as well, at Trail Tales Pod. Email, I have an email, people. You can send messages to it. You can tell me what you like about the show. You can tell me your guest suggestions. I've had a number of good people suggested to me lately, which is awesome. I would really appreciate that. trailtalespod@gmail.com is the email address. Let's read a 5-star review. I've been kind of slacking on this the past couple weeks. This one is from PackerFan252. I love reading the freaking usernames on this shit. It's called Helps with Hiking Fear of Missing Out. So glad I stumbled upon this podcast. There's a lot of good information. Since I can't thru-hike yet, it's nice to listen to this to help with the fear of missing out. Sometimes Kyle's delivery is a bit rough, but it makes me laugh wondering how many beers deep he is. Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah, my delivery is definitely pretty rough. I hate to break it to you, but I was actually zero beers deep for this episode, unfortunately. But I'm sure that will not be the case going forward. Thank you so much for the 5-star review. If anybody else wants to go leave a review and have me just totally screw it up when I read it like that, feel free to do so. It really helps the show. You can also help the show if you tell a friend or a loved one about the show. That's right, go tell your best friend or your ex-girlfriend or your mother-in-law, anybody, I don't care. Go tell somebody, please. That's a huge way that small podcasts like this grow. I would really appreciate that. Maybe share it on social media, something like that. I love to see people post the episodes on Facebook and various places, so please go do that. I would really appreciate it. Last thing I gotta say real quick, don't hit that skip button. We're almost through here, people. Patreon. Trail Tales has a Patreon for $5 or $10 a month. You will get a bonus episode and a blooper reel. That's right, extra content every single month, folks. This month I did the bonus episode on some of the history behind Trail Tales and why I decided to start this podcast in the first place. And I also went very detailed into my process of how I do this show. Everything from finding guests and setting up, the interviews all the way down to literally the effects that I put on the audio and stuff when I am editing the episode. So I think it came out pretty well. I do them kind of unedited. I like to just kind of go through and talk for 30 or 40 minutes, and I always have a really good time with them. So if you're interested in that, and of course interested in the bloopers maybe, please go check it out. It helps cover some of the small costs that are associated with the show, helps to ensure that I can continue to keep making these episodes. I would really appreciate that. All right, let's do it. Let's get into the episode, my conversation with Kristen Gardella, Appalachian Trail class of 1999. Go, episode number 25 of Trail Tales. Today I am joined by Kristen Gardella. And Kristen, what is your trail name?
My trail name is Crispina.
Crispina,
like Christina, except with a P.
That's a good one.
And I can explain it if you like.
Yeah, let's hear it. I don't get into the trail names enough on these episodes, so yeah, let's hear it.
So I used to, once upon a time, I used to do a lot of archaeological field work, and I lived for many years down in Central America and South America. And so I did a lot of hiking and camping and all kinds of things down there. And I was working one year in Belize, and I had a crew of workmen, and we would go out every day and we'd be surveying through the jungle. And we'd be cutting these long trails through the jungle and walking together. And at lunch, we would entertain ourselves by doing all kinds of different things, telling stories, we always did like little skits and stuff. It was really strange. And so one day I was dancing with one of these Belizean guys up on top of a fallen tree. And I have no idea why anymore. It was so long ago. And we're both dancing back and forth, and I'm a terrible dancer. And I lost my footing and I fell off the side of the tree, and I fell into a patch of the spines that were on this super spiny tree. So they call them espinas in Spanish.
Okay.
And I was completely covered in them, like if I got hit by a porcupine or something. And so everyone just started making fun of me for having all these spines stuck in me. It was awful. I was crying. I was miserable. They're all laughing at me. And so they kind of took my name, Kristen, which nobody could say, and they all called me Christina, and they molded that together with espinas. So I became Crispina. And no one referred to me by my regular name for years after that. And so since I got that name in the woods on the trail, that I would take that with me.
Just bring it over.
Started doing, yeah. So that's stuck now for 20 plus years.
That's awesome. I feel like, I don't know if I probably have maybe like once or twice, but I usually don't ask my guests like how they got their trail name or like what it even is. Like I meant to ask my last guest, Sarah Williams, what her trail name was, and I like totally forgot. So I'm glad we got that in there. So
how did you get yours originally?
Oh man. So honestly, I don't even know if I've told this story. I might have told it before. I was 16. Actually, my Patreon supporters have heard this story before. I was 16 and I was on my first backpacking trip ever. I was trying to hike the Long Trail as, like I said, a 16-year-old who's never hiked before, or never backpacked before anyways, and had absolutely no idea what he was doing, way in over his head. And my feet were just like totally torn up by like my second day. I was literally hiking in dress socks. Like that's how ridiculous this shit was. And I got to a shelter, Kilgore shelter on the Long Trail /AT, and I pretty much decided, I was with a buddy too, and we pretty much decided we were going to bail that next day. But these guys that were at the shelter were kind of like helping me out with like my feet, and they were just like kind of like teaching me how to like pop my blisters, and like I think they had some first aid stuff too to kind of help with that. And they were just kind of like stereotypical like hippies, I guess, like super nice guys, but they were just kind of like, when they saw my feet, they were like, dude, those are some gnarly blisters, man. Your trail name should be Nar Nar. And I was like so young, and my first trip ever, I thought that was like the coolest trail name ever, like in the world. I was like, that is like the best trail name I've ever heard. Like obviously, like I am Nar Nar now, and I just kind of stuck with it. Like since then, I kind of wish I had gotten a new one at some point, to be honest, but I've just signed way too many logbooks and shelters at this point to change it, so I am forever Nar Nar.
I know someone who changed theirs after a really long time, and it was just too weird. Nobody will refer to them that way anymore, and they keep trying to force it, but it's just not working.
Yeah, I feel like it's the kind of thing, once you take it, like you look at, like officially take it, like you've signed like a number of books, like a log books. A lot of people like refer to you as it's like it's your name. Like you can try all you want to change it, but it's not gonna work, people. It's not gonna work. So moving on from the whole trail name thing, that was great. So Kristen has done a bunch of through hikes, like a bunch of really cool stuff. She hiked the AT in 1999. I was like 3 years old when that happened, 4 years old or something crazy.
Feeling good now? Feeling good about myself?
Sorry. I just think that's so nuts. And we're going to talk a lot about, like the differences between like the whole trail culture and through hiking back then and now, because I'm very curious about that. She's also done a bunch of smaller trails, two of which we're going to talk about today, maybe three, most likely two. Those are the North-South Trail in Rhode Island and the Mid-State Trail in Massachusetts. Now, I'm guessing that a lot of people listening to this haven't really heard of those two trails, especially the North-South Trail. I have vaguely heard of them and watched a couple YouTube videos on them, but that's about it. I really don't know much, so this is going to kind of be like a Kyle learns and asks questions about these trails he might potential hike kind of episode, and hopefully the listeners, you guys, can learn a little bit about them too. And if you're in the New England area, then maybe you can go through hike them yourself. But we're going to start off by just kind of learning a little bit, Kristen, about how you got into backpacking and through hiking in the first place. So, I mean, I pretty much just said it there. Yeah. How did you learn about long distance backpacking?
So I can't really remember a time when I didn't know that people did stuff like this.
Really?
And it's really because of my father. My father was a huge influence on me when I was a kid. So I grew up in Eastern Connecticut, and right outside our back door was I think it's still the largest state forest in Connecticut, the Patchogue State Forest. And there are a ton of shorter long trails out there. There's one that's 28 miles, 16 miles. There's a lot of trails. So I always would be out on those every day. My parents would just kick me out of the house in the morning, and then I would come home at night and I would just go out into the woods. And, that was the 80s. I guess people didn't care as much. I don't know, but they didn't really rein me in at all. So that's all I did was roam around in the woods all day. And then every summer this classic New England stuff, we would go up to the White Mountains.
Yeah.
And we would every single year, we would climb Mount Washington together. And even when I was a very small kid, my dad was determined we were going to do this. And so my brother and I would go up there with him. And I definitely loved it way more than my brother did. I remember it was just like a death march for my brother every time.
Oh,
yeah, we would load up the backpack with snacks, and he would eat them all before we even got to the top. So we had nothing to come back down with. And, we had all the classic experiences. We were up there in August and it was snowing and all the, the good Mount Washington lore. But we would see the through hikers up there because we would always go up the Ammonoosuc Trail and then come down the Jewel Trail. So you cross over near, you have to go near the train tracks, and you're going right by where AT through hikers are going. And of course we were up in the summit building. And so I would see people with these enormous packs. And I remember asking my dad what they were doing, and he told me, and I was just a kid and I couldn't even really conceive of that distance, but it just sounded huge and amazing. And I said to my brother, we have to do that. And clearly he had no interest in doing that. So I just started kind of reading everything I could. It was a very different time. We didn't have YouTube. I didn't have blogs to read. I had to actually go check books out of the library and do as much research as I could. And so I was just in love with the idea. And when I graduated from college, I told my dad, well, I'm going to go do this. And he said, no, you're not going to go by yourself and do that. And I said, no, I'm going to do it. And he retired and said, okay, well, I'm going to go with you. Nice. So that was my first really long through hike was the AT. I had at that point done a bunch of those smaller trails near my house by myself, just in 1 day or 2 day hikes.
Right.
But AT ended up being the first real big one.
Were you happy or kind of bummed out when your dad said that he was going to go with you?
I have to say probably a little bit of both, because part of me was just yeah, I'm going to do this by myself. It's awesome. I'm going to be so independent. I had already done some traveling, and I'd been to several different countries at that point, and I knew he knew I could handle myself, but I was a little disappointed because I kind of wanted to have that independent experience. But then it was also, I thought it was pretty rad because I get to spend this whole time with my dad.
Yeah, definitely.
And my dad is really amazing. He's what is he? He's 83 now and 82 now. And he still every morning gets up and hikes 5 or 6 miles in the woods. And so he was incredibly athletic. So, it was just natural that he'd want to do it too. So I think it was a little bit of both. You're right. It was kind of bittersweet. I was I want want to do this by myself, but my dad's pretty cool, so.
Well, that's it sounds like you had a pretty good attitude about it, so that's good. That's good.
Yes.
I was gonna save this topic for the end, but honestly, we're already talking about it, so why don't we just talk about some of like the similarities and differences between like through hiking then versus through hiking now. So I guess my first question about that is, have you like been back to the AT or like done any sections on the AT like since your through hike in 1999?
Yeah, I've done some short pieces of it. I lived in Philly for 12 years, so I actually went back out and did some parts in Pennsylvania, which, everybody hates Pennsylvania, so why would I do that? But I did do some trail maintenance when I lived down there, and so I did some parts of that. And then I did the long trail in sections, so I redid that section from, Massachusetts to the main junction. And then I've been back on the trail in the Whites and in Connecticut and Massachusetts, but not Maine, not North Carolina, not like the really good stuff.
Yeah, hey, Vermont's good stuff. Whoa,
Vermont is good stuff. I am a big fan of Vermont, and the Long Trail is probably one of my favorite trails ever. So I can talk about long Trail of Vermont and how much I love it too. I'm right there with you.
Awesome. I was just giving you shit there. So like the obvious thing that kind of popped into my head when like thinking about like, oh, what would have the trail been like in 1999 is like the difference in gear. Obviously, like there's been this explosion of like ultralight gear and all this stuff. And honestly, I started hiking like around the time that I feel like the ultralight thing started to become like a little bit more like mainstream and common. So I had some pretty shitty gear on like my first couple hikes, like I said at the beginning of the episode when I was telling my trail name story there. But like for most of my hikes, I've pretty much always had like the whole like ultralight, like, or I think it's ultralight anyway. Some crazy like 5-pound base weight person might disagree, but like my 11, 12, 13-ish pound base weight is like, I think that's pretty ultralight, at least for me anyway. I have a frameless pack and all that stuff. So, all right, I'm going off track here. So, all right, so gear. So gear, like the difference in gear, like I don't even know, like I guess what like do you carry now, and like how has that changed since you through hiked in 1999?
Oh yeah. So just as a starting point, my pack in 1999, I thought it was amazing. It was like top of the line. I had a job at Eastern Mountain Sports, and I saved up all my money. I used my employee discount, and they had this big employee discount sale every year where you could get everything. I think it was 48% off. So I ordered this pack that was made by a company that doesn't exist anymore called Dana Designs. And like in the 90s, this was pretty hot shit. I got this pack that was called the Terraplane, and it carried weight really well. It was very comfortable, but it weighed around 7 pounds.
Oh,
empty.
wow.
And today I am a victim of trying to be ultralight myself, I guess. My base weight now is about 9 pounds and a quarter, 9 pounds and a half. So most of that would have been the pack.
Yeah, really.
So that's a huge difference for me. I've gone through, several packs throughout the years, and I think I've finally got myself down to where I'm comfortable being, but I can't even imagine, because I didn't weigh my pack when I started. We at the Southern Terminus, we didn't go we stayed at Amicalola, but we didn't start there. We didn't do the approach trail, which for shame, I should go back and do that someday. But we did that forest road thing, where you walk back a mile and then you go. So I didn't get to weigh my pack when I started the AT, but I'm fairly certain it was pretty absurd. At least for me, I only weighed I think I weighed like 125 pounds, and it was probably carrying like a 45 pound pack.
Wow.
When I started. So it was a third of my body weight. And I lost a little bit of it here and there, took some things out, but it really kind of stayed the same. There wasn't a lot of stuff that I was carrying that I shipped home or considered luxury items. So it was pretty heavy. The only way that I really was able to really lighten my load was just not carry as much food, which, as you know, that isn't really an option. You need the food. So everything was heavy. I mean, my water filter was this huge, ridiculous thing, all these tubes coming out of it.
Like a pump filter?
It was a pump filter, and it was filled with iodine. I think I consumed iodine all the way up the East Coast, which really messed me up afterwards. Like I had some weird health problems afterwards that eventually went away, but for weeks afterwards, like I had to pee like every 10 minutes. And I think it was all the iodine. So that was, and that thing weighed so much. And I had, what else? I had an MSR whisper light, which I think almost everybody did. That was my stove. I still have it. It still works.
The white gas stove, right?
Yep.
I've seen those before. Yeah.
Yeah. And when we started the AT, so we flew down to Georgia, and we obviously couldn't take any fuel on the plane. And I know this is still a situation for lots of people, but there weren't as many options of places you could pick up camp fuel. And so we get to Atlanta, and then through a series of buses and shuttles, we eventually got out there, and there was nowhere at any point that we were able to stop and get any fuel except a gas station. And the only thing we could do was get actual regular gasoline. And man. What are we going to do? We don't have any food that we can't cook. Nobody talked about cold soaking back then. So we had to do something. So we got gas. And I remember the first night we stayed at Hawk Mountain Shelter. I'll never forget this. And I started the stove up, and these flames were just shooting out feet up into the air and scorching everything. We're like, okay, this is not sustainable. There is no way we can keep this up. We have to get rid of this. So we made it to the third day when we got to what is now Mountain Crossings. It was called the Walazi Center then at Neel's Gap. And we went down to these little cabins that were there, and there was a guy there, and he had a barrel that he was like, well, you can just put the gas in my barrel over here. I was like, all right. So we dumped the gas out, and then he had some white gas. So he was able to pull us up. So thankfully, but the stove was a mess for days. It really had to clean all that stuff out.
Right.
So, funny. I mean, yeah, I did have a titanium pot though back even.
Oh, there you go.
I know.
That's so funny. I
know. It was pretty amazing.
So like,
I mean,
I guess kind of like going off of this, I'm wondering, obviously there weren't like very many, or I would assume, I don't really know for sure, obviously, that there weren't really many ultralight like gear options back then. So like, I guess, is that like the only reason backpackers like weren't really as concerned with weight, or were they even not as concerned with weight back then? Or did people, I pretty much just said it there, like, did people just not care about weight as much? Or you get what I'm going for.
We still talked about it a lot. I mean, especially when you first started BET, everybody, all you do is talk about gear. And you get really sick of that guy who wants to criticize all your gear and tell you should have better stuff. Like that all still happened. Even when you couldn't, research all the latest hot shit on the internet, like you still, and people were definitely talking about ultralight, because there was, the Ray Jardine stuff was out, and people were making their own gear and trying, but there was kind of a limit. There was only so far you could go. And I definitely thought about it a lot. I mean, my father will still make fun of me because I would carry like one Band-Aid. I was like, I'm going to get my first aid kit down and nothing. And then if I needed a Band-Aid, I had to ask him. So he said the only reason that I had a lightweight pack was because he had to carry everything. So I was constantly basically doing that, kind of mooching off of the things that my father would carry so that I could keep a lighter pack. But we definitely all talked about it, but there were limits on what you could do if you weren't able to make your own gear, and even the materials too. Like we didn't have Dyneema, we didn't have stuff like that. So it was a lot different. Like you just naturally, everything was heavier, and people weren't really wearing things like trail runners yet.
I was going to say, I kind of assume you're using some big old boots, huh?
Oh, it's terrible. We had these huge leather heavy boots, and some people had kind of a softer boots, but we thought you had to wear these because, we always went hiking in the White Mountains and everybody wore these big heavy boots there.
And you wore them for the whole Thru-Hike?
Oh yeah. I mean, I only went through 2 pairs of boots because these things were so indestructible. Yeah. I changed them out in Harper's Ferry. I'd broken in 2 pairs of boots ahead of time, and I got one of them a size bigger, and I sent that to myself in Harper's Ferry, and that's where I changed.
Smart.
And those they made it the rest of the way, no problem. Like you just couldn't destroy the things. But after we finished, my feet, it took me about 6 months for my feet to feel normal again. And I lost all my toenails.
Yikes.
Yeah. And my dad too. My dad ended up having his feet just hurt him forever. So now he is a trail runner man now. He's like, it's the squishiest, thickest, most ridiculous trail runners you can get.
Good.
But yeah, it really caused a lot of blisters, toenail loss, all those fun things.
Oh man, I can't even imagine. That's so crazy. One of the other things that kind of popped into my head when I was thinking about like the whole 1999 Thru-Hike thing is just like the difference, I'm assuming, in the amount of like people on the trail. So like obviously like every year for like the past couple of years, there's been more and more people starting Thru-Hikes of the AT and the PCT, I believe too. It's more popular than ever. How many hikers, I know it varies, section to section, but on average, like how many other like Thru-Hikers were you seeing? How many like day hikers, section hikers, like just how busy was the trail back then?
So it's still, and it's always going to be this way. It was still obviously busier in the South because, a lot of people would start and then drop.
Yeah.
But the completion rate was a lot lower back then because it was, I don't want to take away from anyone's experience today and say, oh, well, we had it harder. But
I feel like you definitely did. Like,
well, we didn't have, I would say we didn't have as much support. Like Trail Magic, we can talk about that in a second. Like we did not have.
I was going to ask about that next, actually. Yeah, the trail culture.
Yeah, so I'll kind of touch on numbers first. Like my first night at Hawk Mountain, like today when I see people talking about it, they're like, oh my God, there were 50 tents. Or I think we had like 5 people there.
Wow.
And I started in mid-March, so it would be, there would be plenty of people. It was kind of the more popular time. And, we had some crowded shelters in the beginning, and the Smokies were definitely crowded since they make you stay in the shelters. They did that then too. But then I think after we got to Virginia, it really started to quiet down. And there were many, many nights where it was just my dad and me, even that far south.
Interesting.
And we would go, as we got further north, there would be times or sometimes we'd go days without seeing another Thru-Hiker or anybody. So it was really quiet. And I remember thinking by the end that I felt like there weren't that many women left out there either. Like if I saw another woman, we would just be like, oh my God, there you are. Thank God.
Wow.
So it got so quiet by the end. The day we summited Katahdin, my dad and I, and then there was one other guy who he was flip-flopping. We were the only people that went up that day. And it was August 8th. So I look today and I see people's summit videos and there's like a whole crowd of people up there.
Oh yeah, there was a ton of people up there when I finished. Yeah.
Yeah, there was no one up there. We were lucky we had that flip-flopper there to take our picture. Otherwise, we wouldn't have had anybody.
I was going to say, like, nobody would take a picture.
Yeah.
But see, that's just so incredible because that is like just not how it is anymore. For better or for worse, I'm not going to get into that whole conversation.
Yeah,
but like, I think I'm trying to think of the nights that I spent at shelters on my Thru-Hike, which was probably like maybe at least half of the time, maybe slightly more than half the time, because I did do quite a bit of stealth camping. I think there were 2 nights that I can think of where there was nobody else besides me and like the people I was like hiking with specifically at the shelter, like maybe 2 times, and that was it. Throughout the entire trail. As far as days that I went without seeing another Thru-Hiker, that was absolutely 0. Like there was not even close. Like probably the least amount of Thru-Hikers I ever saw in a day was maybe like 4 or 5. Like like it's totally different now. Totally different now.
Yeah, when I look at, I do what everybody else does. I watch the YouTube videos and everything, and when I look at that stuff now, it's kind of scary to me. I don't know. I still do plenty of hiking. I'm on the trail all the time. I see plenty of people, but I think if I ever did the AT again, at this point, I would definitely do it Sobo because I could not deal with that many people, or I would be one of those people who leaves in like January.
Yeah.
And just deal with the weather just so I could have some time to myself because I don't think I could handle that. maybe if I were 23 again doing it, I'd want to hang out with a lot of people, but at 43, I don't. So,
yeah, it's tough, honestly, because it was a little bit different for me too, because I left in mid-May, so that was like not a normal, like I didn't start in like the bubble. I definitely was in the bubble by the time I finished, but like, so it still wasn't even that bad for me, like compared to other people, I'm sure. And honestly, I'm thinking if and when I go do the PCT, I'm thinking about going southbound for the same reason. Maybe I don't think many people do the PCT southbound at all. I mean, obviously not that many people do the AT southbound, but people still do it. So I don't know. That's on the table. Maybe we'll see.
Well, if you want to avoid people, I don't know if we'll get time to talk about it, but you should definitely try the Coas Trail.
Yes.
There's nobody out there.
Yes, I believe it. So, I guess like my last question on the whole, topic that we're on right now, 1999 AT Thru-Hike, yeah. So what was the trail culture like back then? I know you just a second ago you talked about the lack of trail magic, and I kind of want to know about that, and just like anything else related to the trail culture, the hostels, the towns kind of accommodating hikers, the locals being aware of like the AT and the Thru-Hikers and all that stuff. What was the trail culture like back then?
Yeah, so with trail magic, it was kind of rare. Like there weren't hiker feeds. I know there were a couple of times where people would set up. I remember hearing one day that there was somebody set up who was making breakfast for people, and all of us were like, "Oh my God, we gotta get there!" And by the time we got to this gap, there was no one there.
Oh,
so
no.
I didn't get anything. So, all the instances that I can remember of receiving anything like that were, the finding a soda in the stream or something like that. Or I remember in the Smokies, some guy gave me like a half-eaten box of fried chicken. And of course I ate it.
Yeah.
It was always really, really exciting when you would find something. There was this one guy in Virginia, like near Catawba, named Southpaw, who had hiked the trail before, and he had a cooler he would maintain, and there were sandwiches and oranges and stuff in there, and we were all talking about this, like that's how exciting that stuff was. Like he didn't come along and have Fresh Ground, making everybody awesome meals and stuff. We didn't have that, and maybe some people further south of me did, I don't know, but I feel like my dad and we also missed out on everything. We had the worst luck. We got to the home place. It was closed. We didn't get to eat there. And I know everybody still talks about that restaurant. We didn't get to eat there. When we got to Pennsylvania, we didn't get to do the half-gallon challenge because the store wasn't open yet. Like stuff like that always happened. We kept missing stuff. And we were on kind of a tight schedule because I had to get home to go to grad school.
Okay.
And so we couldn't just hang around for a couple of days. So I think we kind of rushed a little bit. I mean, we did the trail in it was about 4 months and 3 weeks, which the trail was 30 miles shorter back then, but it also didn't have as many switchbacks. It was a little rough.
That's pretty impressive,
so
honestly.
It was still pretty fast, with all the heavy gear.
Yeah.
But, so it was very different. I mean, I don't know. A lot of the people that I knew who were out there were just kind of out there to do their thing. And it was more like I'm out here on my solo mission.
Right.
We were all still
There's no
really friendly.
Trail families back then. Tramleys.
We didn't have a tramley. I mean, there were people we hiked around for a while, and then we would hike around some other people. And then you would see people 1,000 miles later. Oh,
right.
But we didn't have a tramley. It was, and that might have been kind of a function of me being there with my dad. Like my dad was my automatic tramley. But I mean, there's still definitely people that I, sporadically keep in touch with. Like since this is 20 years since we did it, a whole bunch of us are going back for trail days to kind of have a reunion and march in the parade together.
Nice.
So I'll get to see some people I haven't seen in 20 years. So that'll be pretty awesome. But, I think you asked about towns, like people were still really friendly. We didn't really have an issue hitchhiking in the South. It was a lot more difficult in the North, but from what I hear, it's still kind of the same. I remember, I hate to talk, to disparage any state more than others, but I remember in Tennessee, there were a couple of really negative interactions that we had with locals who were pretty unhappy about the trail. And
oh, really?
and I can't confirm this. This was just what I heard. And I know there's some truth to this, that there was some still negative feelings about the fact that some of the trail had gone through lands that everyone felt like they had been seized by eminent domain. So there was some kind of negative feelings about that.
Yeah, I could see that being an issue. Yeah.
Yeah. There were some sections where blazes were painted out brown. And so you wouldn't know where the trail was.
Oh,
and
wow. That's kind of sketchy.
There were some fish hooks strung across the trail and
what?
fishing line.
Wait,
yeah,
did you actually like encounter that personally?
No, I didn't see the fish hooks. It was another hiker told me.
Oh, that's awful. Yeah. Wow. That's fucked up.
But the majority of it, I felt like people were really friendly. We had some really good experiences where people took us into their homes. There weren't as many hostels, but there definitely were hostels, and they were really welcoming. Like if we needed help, if we needed to get somewhere, we usually didn't have a problem.
Okay.
It may have taken a little bit more work, but I think people were really friendly. I feel like people didn't know as much back then that the trail was kind of like going through their backyard or as near their house. They'd be like, what are you doing out here? Whereas obviously today, I think people know what you're doing out there.
Oh yeah, for sure.
But very few instances where I ever felt like anyone was unfriendly. I think people still were always willing to help you out because they could tell that you kind of were in need a little bit.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay, that I don't like that fish hooks thing, man. That's
that's
I'm
awful. Really
awful.
glad that didn't happen to me. And I'm, I since I didn't experience it myself, maybe it was just a rumor, maybe it was just somebody trying to scare people. I don't know. I hope that's all.
I mean, I can definitely see someone getting pretty pissed though about like their land kind of being taken away from them just for like a stupid hiking trail or something like that, So I mean, not that justifies any sort of behavior like that at all. But
I don't even know that's true, and it's really sad that I don't, because I've been an ATC member for since like 1998. I should know that stuff, but
oh well.
But I don't even know if that actually is true. So
I could see it. Maybe someone can go do some research and find out.
Yes,
let's hope it's not. But unfortunately, I could see it being true. Let's talk a little bit about the North-South Trail. So
okay. Yes.
I don't know very much. I'll tell you what I do know first of all off the top of my head, and then we'll kind of go from there. I've got a bunch of questions about it. So I know it is in Rhode Island. I know, people, you heard that right. There's a Thru-Hiking trail in Rhode Island. I know that it goes like the length of the state, and I know that like the end of it is like on the beach, which is pretty cool. It looks pretty cool anyways. But that's pretty much it. So I guess
right.
let's just start by getting a little bit more information. Like, what exactly is a North-South Trail? Like, how long is it? Like, kind of that vibe there.
It is approximately 78 miles long. So it's a short long distance trail, but it is the longest long distance trail in Rhode Island, which is a very small state. So
yes.
And it does go the length of the state from the Massachusetts border down to the ocean. So you can either go Nobo, you can go Sobo. I went Sobo because I figured it would be nice to end at the ocean.
Yeah, really.
And you can connect it with the Mid-State Trail, which we'll talk about, and then the Wapak Trail, which goes into New Hampshire, and you can kind of put them together to make a trail that's about 191 miles long. So you can actually go from the ocean slightly into New Hampshire. So it's not a very old trail, but it's very well maintained, and it's incredibly well blazed. It is not hard to follow at all.
See, that's one of those things I feel like with some of these smaller, like lesser known trails, like the blazing and navigation could be an issue, but it sounds like they're pretty good about it, huh?
No, they overblaze this trail. I mean, it's incredible. You will not get lost. It's just like
interesting.
There's one section near the northern end where there's not too much elevation gain, but there's one section where you're going up this hill, and I remember like the rock directly in front of my eyes would have a blaze, and I'd look up a couple of feet, and then there's a blaze, and then there's another blaze, and then I'm like, okay, I got it. I go to the top of the hill. So it's very well taken care of, and it's very easy to follow, which is good because, as you've noted, there's not a lot of resources on the internet to figure out where to go.
What color are the blazes?
They are kind of like an aqua blue.
Okay. Interesting.
And then there's little signs too that have the outline of the state of Rhode Island on it and say North-South Trail too. So sometimes you see those as well.
Okay. So I've been to Rhode Island before, but not for like a long time. Certainly not in the context of like doing any sort of hiking. So what is like I guess just like the scenery, like what kind of environments are you walking through? Like what are like the highlights, I guess, kind of that you're looking at while you're hiking?
That's one of the cool things about this trail is you get a little bit of everything. So it starts out in the northwestern corner of the state, which is the least populated area in the state, I think. And it's mostly woods up there.
Okay.
So you're going through some hardwood forests, and unfortunately, there's been a lot of gypsy moth damage in Connecticut and Rhode Island, in New England in general, but in this area. So a lot of the trees are a little leafless at this point, and I don't know what's going to happen. I mean, I don't live too far from there now, and a lot of the trees near me have been cleared because they've been killed by gypsy moths.
Oh wow, that sucks.
So the beginning is all hardwoods, and then there's lots of blueberry thickets, and there's some rolling terrain, and then as you go further south, you get into lower elevations. So for Rhode Island, let me give some context for people who've never been to Rhode Island. The highest point you're ever going to encounter is just a little bit over 800 feet. So there's not, when I say that there's elevation, it's kind of just rolling hills in the northwest corner. And then you go through some small towns. You go by a lot of historic cemeteries and through some villages with some historic buildings.
Okay.
There's some road walking. There's some farmland. There's one point where you go through a huge sod farm and you actually have to walk through the fields. There's some marshes and some swampy areas too. And then you do go through kind of the coastline. There's a state park near the coastline, and then you end up at the beach. So it's actually really varied, even though it's such a small state.
Yeah, really. That's I never really thought about that too much, honestly. That sounds pretty cool. So one of the things that I could not find like hardly any information on when I was like researching about this trail, because I kind of do want to do it in the near future here, is camping. So like, I know there's no like established like backcountry campsites. It sounds like, are there like any campsites in the backcountry at all? Like, can you even camp in the backcountry, or like, how did you handle camping?
So this is one of the trickiest parts of this trail. So it does go through a couple of state campgrounds where you can pay for a campsite.
So like actual like state parks, like you could bring your car in theory. So like a straight up like campground. Okay.
Yeah. And so you can kind of rent, or pay for a campsite in those campgrounds. There are some private campgrounds adjacent to the trail too, where you can pay to stay.
You say adjacent, do you mean like how far off the trail are they?
Oh, only a short distance or right on the trail.
Okay. Okay.
One of the places you can stay is actually a nudist campground, which is right on the trail.
Interesting.
Which I didn't stay there, but that was near the end of my first day, which was a 30+ day. And so I was thinking about it. I was like, oh man, at this point, I don't care. I will take off all my clothes if I have a place to lay down. So there's some places like that. And then there's one or two shelters near the trail, but they are pay shelters that are part of state parks. There's one in Acadia, and then there's one in the George Washington management area. So there are places to stay. It is a little tricky. And then a lot of the trail goes through private land. So you have to be really careful if you are attempting to stealth camp. And, everything that you will read about the trail says do not do it because you're going to be on somebody's land. So you have to be really careful and really aware of where your state lands are and whether or not you're actually in somebody's property.
And that kind of just sounds like a hassle. So I'm assuming most people probably don't do the stealth camp thing then.
No, most people, I don't think most people do it as a through hike, or if they do, they try to do it very quickly.
Okay. Interesting.
Most of the people who I know who have done this trail have done it in only a couple days. So I did it in 3 days, and then I'm going back to do it again this year, and I'm going to try to do it in 2 days.
Oh, wow.
Just for fun, just to see if I can do it in 2 days.
Wow. That's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah. I'm going to go back and I'm waiting for the days to get a little bit longer, and then when I've got a lot of sunlight, I'll try to bust out a couple of really big days. But so a lot of people try to do it really quickly so they don't have to spend as many nights out there, or you can do it in some very, very short days so you can plan it out through all the different places where you can stay. But I think a lot of people do it in sections instead.
Okay, but there are, like, it sounds like enough campgrounds, like, spaced out, like, in a way that you could, like, kind of through hike it, and maybe more like a 4 or 5 day kind of thing, like a more like...
Yeah, I think 5 days is what a lot of people try to do, is around 5.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, you have the good thing about it being close to civilization is if, you want to get an ice cream cone, you can. If you want to get a burger, you can.
That's a good question. Yeah. Like, how are there like restaurants like that, like along the trail, like pretty close to the trail?
There's one part where you go right through the parking lot of this kind of classic New England, dairy barn kind of restaurant called Shady Acres, and they have ice cream and they have everything. So there's definitely plenty of places where you're not too far from food.
Okay, good. That's always good to know.
Yeah.
So how many episodes of Trail Tales have you listened to?
I've listened to a good chunk of them.
Have you listened to the some of the earlier episodes?
I'm trying to think when I started listening. I don't think I've heard the first few.
Did you listen to episode 9 with Tuts trekking on?
Yes.
So he is like the reason I even know about this North-South Trail, because he attempted to hike it like a number of years ago, and he made like a little film about it, and that's actually how that's how I found out about it, and most of what I know is from that. But I don't remember exactly how far he made it. I haven't watched the video in a while, but I don't think he made it very far, and the reason being was, according to him, was because of the water. He said that water situation wasn't very good. I can't remember exactly what he said, but I recall it being like the sources not being good sources, and there not really being that many of them anyway. So what was the water situation like for you?
So for me, I didn't really have any problems. Since I was only out there 3 days, I didn't have to worry about finding too many of them.
I guess if you're covering a lot of terrain in one day. I
did though, every time I found water, I did fill both of my liter bottles. So I was pretty much always carrying 2 liters, which is, my pack wasn't very heavy because I was only going to be out there a short time. So I didn't really care. So I made sure I had plenty of water. But
right.
So in the very northern end, there are a few creeks that you cross, and there's some ponds. But I started out that day, I got dropped off, and then that's one thing we should talk about, is kind of accessing the northern terminus. But when I got in there, I got dropped off that morning, so I had water from my house. So I started out with that. And I remember when I had to fill up on my first day, I was walking. I had a hard time near the end of the day finding water before I was going to camp. And I remember I walked by there was kind of this swampy looking pond, and I said, well, this is what I got. So I climbed down off the side of the road, and I'm standing in this swampy pond filtering water, and this lady drove by me, and she slows down, and she's giving me this really kind of angry look, and like, hey, I waved at her, and she's like, what is this woman doing over here on the side of the road standing in the swamp? And so she turns around and she comes back and she pulls over, and she's like, do you need any help? Are you okay? I'm like, no, I'm fine. I'm just getting some water. And so she drove away, and then she came back again, and she's like, I have to know, why are you getting water? And so I said, well, I'm hiking this trail. And she had no idea. She had lived on this trail all this time, and she had no idea I went in front of her house. So she was so confused at what I was doing standing in the swamp. But
that's so funny.
I think, I feel like I didn't really have any trouble. I went in June, so it wasn't like incredibly hot. I think if you went in August, it would be bad, and a lot of the smaller water sources may have dried up at that point, but I didn't really have any problems in June. I mean, if you don't mind some swamp water, you'll be fine.
Okay, that's good to hear. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So what were you saying a second ago about the accessing the northern terminus?
So the northern terminus is on the Massachusetts border, and it's kind of you can't drive to it. It's out in the woods. So there's a couple of different ways to get to it. So that's something to think about if you're going to do it, is how do you want to access that spot? Because it just starts there. It's kind of like, where the Long Trail starts in Massachusetts, just on the border. It's kind of like that. So there's a couple of different ways to get in. You can come in from the east and you can park in Massachusetts at this lake, and you can hike out to the Mid-State Trail and then take the Mid-State Trail south to the Rhode Island border, and then you can get started.
Okay.
Or you can come in Rhode Island. There's a road that goes across the state, and you can get dropped off there, walk back north up the North-South Trail or up a dirt road, and then come back. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't want to duplicate anything.
Right.
And then since I live in Connecticut, the way I came in is my husband dropped me off on this rail trail called the Airline Trail, which heads up towards Massachusetts. And so I hiked up this rail trail, and then there's a trail off of that goes to a tri-state marker that marks the border of Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island,
pretty
where
cool.
They come together. Yeah, so you can hike this little trail up to that tri-state marker. And then I didn't know if I could do this, so I had to do a scouting trip beforehand. There is a line, kind of a cleared path or trail down the Rhode Island, Massachusetts border. So I walked that in, and then I was able to kind of zigzag a little bit and get onto the Mid-State Trail and then come down to the northern terminus and the South Trail. So that turned out to be the fastest for me, but it did take a little bit of a scouting trip first to make sure I could do it.
Interesting. That sounds pretty cool. I didn't realize or really put any thought or research into like actually accessing the trail, so that's good to know. I probably would have gotten down there and been like, okay, like wait a minute, like, where the hell do I go now?
Yeah.
That's good to know. How many people, or you don't have to give me like exact numbers because I'm sure you don't really know, or maybe you do. Like how many people like hike the North-South Trail like roughly per year, do you think?
I have no idea.
How many people did you see then?
So when I was out there, I saw 2 other hikers the whole time, and they were day hikers, and they were in this one state forest that you go through, and that's it. So
interesting.
Yeah, nobody. And it seemed like I was out there in June. You would think you would see somebody else, but I didn't see anybody. I mean, there are 2 trail registers, and a couple of people had signed into them. I could see that a couple of other people had gone through and were trying to do through hikes. So there were a handful of people, but if you're only a day or 2 behind someone, you're never going to see them because then they're going to be done.
Right.
It's 78 miles. So, so I didn't see any other through hikers while I was out there.
Okay. Interesting. How about, like maps and guidebooks? Like what's like the go-to resource or resources for people that want to hike this trail?
So there is a really excellent guide that was published, but it was last printed in, I think, like 2003.
Oh, yes.
And I don't know, I know I've seen on Facebook and stuff some updates about that there will be a new one forthcoming, but I have no idea. So if you can find one, you can often find it I think there's some copies in libraries and things, and it's supposedly very excellent. I've never seen it. But you can, I looked to see if I could get a copy of it on Amazon. And when I was looking, there were some used copies and they were like over $100. And just today, just to see, because I knew we were going to talk about this, I figured I would look. And there are 2 copies for sale right now on Amazon. And this seems fake. One of them is for sale for $859 and one is $922.
What the hell?
So, yeah. So
that is ridiculous.
So I know I've heard other people use this book and they've said it's really great. If I could get it, I would, but I didn't have it.
So what did you use then?
So I had some maps that I downloaded that somebody had walked it and made a GPS track, and then they overlaid it over some old topo maps and they posted it online. So I actually downloaded all those maps and printed them out, and then I carried that with me and I followed this guy's GPS track. But like I said, it's so well blazed. You don't even really need the maps. It's obviously nice to have them. So you kind of know
I'm just thinking for
on.
like knowing what's coming up and like the camping thing too. Like, do you know how like most people do that then, or like plan that stuff out if they don't have this really ridiculously priced used guidebook?
So there's definitely some trip reports that people have posted online. There's some blogs and stuff like that. So if you Google North-South Trail, Rhode Island, you'll run across some other people's trip reports. And so they'll have some information up there that you can use to kind of help plan.
Okay.
One of the good things about it is that it crosses, this is a good thing and a bad thing, it crosses a lot of roads. So if you can't find a place to stay, you might be able to hitchhike somewhere or, find that, someone can come bail you out. There's not, there are ways to get off there if you need to.
Interesting. So I don't think we're going to have time to get to the Mid-State Trail, Kristen, unfortunately. But that's okay, because this just means I'm going to have you back on at some point, and we're going to talk about the Mid-State Trail, and we're going to talk about the Coas. I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. That's going to be a nightmare when we get there. But no, we're going to talk about those two trails in another episode. I'm booking you right now. I hope that's okay.
Okay. All right, I'll come back.
I hope that's okay. But no, so I guess I'm looking over my questions for the North-South Trail here. Let's see. I guess my last question, what was just like your favorite part of the trail?
So I really enjoyed surprisingly, a lot of the farms that it would go through. I got to see so many, there were a lot of different animals. I remember there was one part I was walking by this one farm and they had all these guinea hens, which is, they're some, it's a farm livestock poultry, and they're really loud and people use them. My husband and I have been considering getting them for our farm. They're really obnoxious and loud, and some people use them to guard other animals. And so I went down this one road and there was a farm and the dog came out and barked at me, and then it just sat there. But then the guinea hen came out and it would not let me go. It was like, get the hell out of here. It was screaming at me essentially and chasing me down the road, which I just thought was hilarious. It's this chicken type thing. So you get to see all kinds of different animals and people. And since it goes through so many populated areas, there's just a lot of different scenery that I hadn't seen before, when you're just like green tunnel, just woods. So I did talk to a lot of people who weren't hiking, which was really interesting for me. Because like I mentioned with that other lady, there were so many people who had no idea that this thing even existed. And, they would just stop and ask me what I was doing, and we get into these great conversations. So I met a lot of people. There was one guy who pulled up next to me, and it was the end of my first day, and I was really tired, and I think I was at like 32 miles at that point, and he could tell that I looked exhausted, and I had a backpack on, and I think he clearly thought I was homeless, because he pulled right up next to me, and first question he asked me was, "Do you have a home?" And I said, yeah, I got a home. He's like, are you sure? I said, no, I have a home. It's not right here, but I do have one. And then he's like, are you married? I said, it's not really relevant, but yes, I am married. My husband's the one who dropped me off. And so he was so concerned about me and like had to talk to me for a while and explained what I was doing. He had no idea that this was there. And then he got all really excited about it. He was like, I'm going to check this out. I'm really interested. So it was kind of cool to be a little bit of an ambassador for this trail. That it was really essentially my first time being on it too, but I was telling all these people about it and they were getting really excited about it. So that was probably one of my favorite parts about it. And then also obviously ending at the beach is really great.
Yeah, that must be sick.
Your feet hurt, you walk right into the ocean, and that was amazing. There are so many neat historical things too. I went through an old abandoned ski resort. You don't even think Rhode Island would have ski, but they, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So
that's cool. Yeah.
Any hill, New Englanders will ski down it. So there was an old ski resort, and there are all kinds of cemeteries everywhere. So there's just, it's really interesting. I know a lot of people get down on this trail because there's a lot of road walking, but in many ways that opens it up so that you can explore all these different areas and see all of these interesting kind of cultural features that you might not on a real wilderness trail.
Okay, interesting. Yeah, that's awesome. I feel like I just learned a bunch about that there. It's definitely on my radar. The Mid-State Trail is as well, and we'll talk about that next time.
Okay.
I'm usually not quite as strict about like cutting the time, but I am going to be traveling this weekend and all next week, so I have to do all the editing for this episode and like pre-publish it all tomorrow night. So I want to like try to cap it at around an hour.
Yes.
But we still have a few minutes here to get to the best part of the show, which is story time. So Kristen, you've done so many hikes. You've done a lot of miles, so I'm sure you've got plenty of stories. But if you had to pick one to share right now at the end of the episode, what would it be?
So I was going to tell a story from the Coos Trail, which happened to me last year.
Very briefly, what is the Coos?
The Coos Trail.
I can't pronounce it. Coos Trail.
The Coos Trail is a trail that goes through northern New Hampshire. So the section that most people don't hike in. It goes from the Canadian border down to Crawford Notch in the Whites. So it's that kind of lost area of New Hampshire.
Gotcha.
And we should definitely talk about that sometime.
I would love to learn all about it.
It's super special. So I had been out there for a while, and I was camping near there's so many ponds out there. And so you will run into tons of wildlife. I saw a moose probably within like 30 minutes of being on the trail. Nice. So there was one night I was near this one pond. I can't remember what it was called, but I was all alone. I hadn't really seen that many people at all, and there was nobody else camped anywhere near me. And I was asleep, and I got woken up by all of this ridiculous splashing. And there were these loons. There's a ton of loons on this trail, and there's these loons, which for people who aren't from the north, if you're listening, there are these beautiful birds, and they make these very kind of creepy noises. You've probably heard it in a movie. And the loons were kind of playing and splashing around and making this huge amount of noise and just crashing and splashing. I'm like, oh my God, what are they doing? They must be fighting. And it was just horrible loon noises and splashing and splashing. And so finally they calmed down, and I went back to sleep. And then I'm woken again by this much larger splashing, just sploosh, sploosh, sploosh. And I go over, and then I look, and I can see there's some moose over there. And so it was kind of scary because, they're really big. I tried to get further away, and I could hear this just insane smashing and crashing in the water. And I'm like, whatever they're doing, I do not want to be near this, because it's, I don't know if they're fighting. I don't know what is going on. This is awful. And they kept me awake for hours. I couldn't fall asleep. They were so loud. And finally, I got so tired, I drifted off to sleep. And in the morning, I went back down there to this pond to look. And there was this very small little it was like a raft that kids would build that they would float out in the middle of the pond that they could dive off of and stuff. And so it's just floating there. And I realized these moose had been trying to jump on this thing essentially all night long. And they were playing. And so I couldn't see it, which is unfortunate because it was so dark. But I guess that's what was going on. These moose were just playing together and enjoying themselves all night, splashing on this raft. And it was just at that point an experience that had been kind of scary turned into something that was really kind of sweet. And
definitely.
I really loved how much wildlife I got to see on that trail, and that was really kind of like the capping experience. It was so cool.
That's incredible. Yeah.
I
really want to get up there. That's another trail that's kind of been on my radar. Actually, for like a hot second, like a couple of years ago, a buddy, my friend Dan, and I thought about doing it, but I don't remember what. I think we ended up going to Montana instead, or doing something else. But that's definitely on my radar as well, and I definitely want to have another conversation about that so I can learn a lot about it, because I have a bunch of questions about that trail as well. So
I would love to come back. I've got a lot of weird little trails planned for this summer, so maybe come back later in the year and we could talk about some of those.
Absolutely. With that said, I think we're gonna kind of wrap it up. Kristen, thank you so much for taking the time today. I really appreciate it. Do you want to share your social media, Instagram, or anything like that?
So I do Facebook. I don't really check it that much. My Instagram is Mrs. Von Jazz Hands, which we should probably put in the show notes or something.
Yes, I will.
But yeah, if you want to find me, it's Mrs. Von Jazz Hands.
Awesome. That's that's great. That's great. Okay. Yeah, I think that's gonna do it. Go Bruins. About to go watch some hockey. That's not
Nice.
the reason I'm cutting it short. I promise. I do have to get this done tomorrow, but maybe that has something. I also have to pack too. I'm like a bunch of shit going on.
Yeah,
Kristen,
I got a whole bunch of gear on my floor too because I'm doing a trip this weekend.
oh
too,
man,
so.
you should see my room right now. It's a freaking mess. Kristen, thank you so much. Everybody listening,
Absolutely.
thank you all so much. Have a good one.